What is going on, everybody? My name is Dakota and welcome back to Cologne. Today we're going to be looking at and reviewing BDK Parfums Gris Charnel. This is the Eau de Parfum version. This is a fragrance that I was asked about, so I figured we'd go ahead and just do a video on it. So this was one that I had just lounged around in the cabinet, and I guess somehow somebody saw it and they was asking me questions about it. And I went ahead and answered their questions, but at the same time, I thought I would go ahead and just do a review on this one, just because it's one I haven't done before. It's one that I've had for a little while, and it's not one that I reach for very often. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and kick off the video the way we always like to, and that's gonna be showing off the atomizer. And the atomizer on this thing is amazing. It is highly pressurized. It's got a good burst to it. It projects well. So the atomizer on this is top tier. What you get when this thing first gets in the air is you get a heavy dose of that wood, you get a good bit of warmth, but it also stays kind of light. It has a little bit of like an earthy floral background to it that you can kind of pick up on the opening. But one of the things that I like the most about it is actually going to be some of the notes in it. So this, on the top of it, has fig and black tea, and funny enough, you can kind of smell that a little bit. One of the things that I like about fragrances, because I have a few now that use black tea, this was the first one I had that did that. What I feel like that black tea does gives it a little bit of like a fresh bitterness. And I know that's kind of a weird way to describe it, but tea in nature is very bitter. But the way this is blended has a little bit of a crispness to it, has a little bit of a freshness, but also has a whole lot of that like smooth bitter. The fragrance is not harsh at all, but that's just one of the few things that I like, that it's different enough to have a little bit of a sharpness to it, but also be very smooth at the exact same time. But what we're gonna do now is I'm gonna go ahead and put some there on the skin. We're gonna get this drawn down a little bit, and we're gonna go over the notes of this real quick. So the top notes on this is gonna be cardamom, fig, and black tea. And like I said, you get a beautiful dose of the fig and tea mixture, and that is one of the things that I love the most about this fragrance. Is the opening might be the best part of this fragrance. The middle notes on this are gonna be iris and bourbon vetiver. Not really sure what the bourbon vetiver is. If I'm being honest, I do get some vetiver out of this. I kind of get a little bit of that dark, almost kind of dirty vetiver. And the base notes on this are going to be tonka bean and sandalwood. So that sandalwood is going to keep it light. It's going to be fresh. The tonka bean is going to sweet this up a little bit. Although this fragrance is not one that I tend to get a whole lot of sweets from. Like I said, on my skin, the biggest thing that I get is going to be like that tea, that fig, and on my skin I also get a little helping of that iris. It is a very smooth, creamy iris. It's not bitter, it's not harsh at all. It's very florally based iris, so it doesn't have a lot of that thick, heavy lipsticky smell, but it's definitely in the background to where you can pick it up. You know it's there, but it's not so dominating that it's going to remind you of a Dior Home Intense or anything like that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go over the price, performance, and the availability. So availability wise, this is going to be more of an online retail store. Your major retailers aren't really going to have this one in stock. As far as price and performance, price wise, for this is a 100 ml bottle, you can pick these up for about the 150 to 160, give or take. I want to say they make a 50 ml bottle. I think that one floats in around the 120. And performance-wise on this, the performance is very good. Longevity-wise, I get about 7 to 9 hours. Sillage-wise, the sillage is a little bit weak, as well as the projection. This one does set very close to the skin. Even though it does have some of the stuff in here, you would think it would want to project a little bit harder. Like I said, it's sub 1 to 2 foot definitely on the skin. Now the sillage, obviously you can kind of manipulate that a little bit, just because if you're at a place where you can up and move around a lot, the sillage on this is going to be. But speaking of the sillage, one of the things that I genuinely enjoy the most about this fragrance is this fragrance smells extremely high quality. This fragrance smells incredibly natural. There is not a hint of syntheticness anywhere in this fragrance that my nose can pick up. And that's one of the things that I'm really starting to enjoy, especially as the fragrance thing gets a little deeper and evolves more, is I understand some fragrances have to have a little bit of that synthetic smell, but I also love when fragrances can do what this one does and stays so natural. It smells so good. So one of the things that I think helps the naturality of this, naturality, is that even a word? One of the things that I love that makes this fragrance smell so natural is I think the way it was blended up. I think the way they used the fig, the tea, the iris, some of that bourbon vetiver, and like I said, you don't really get any bourbon off of it, but a lot of the vetiver, some of the earthiness you get out of this, even though that earthiness can be a little bit harsh, it does smell incredibly natural. And it's a little bit early from when I enjoy wearing this fragrance the most. To me, this is more of a winter to spring fragrance We did have a huge break. We had a massive heat wave come through. We're getting up in the 50s and 60s. And that's honestly when I like to wear this one the most. I like to wear this one when a lot of the greens start to come out, when a lot of the winter time is kind of breaking off and we're warming up just a little bit. But now we can talk about the deeper parts of the dry down a little bit. So as this dries down, as I mentioned before, this has an incredibly thick earthiness to it. So a lot of that iris tends to stay on my skin very well. A lot of the vetiver stays on my skin very well. One of the things that I do not get much of at all out of this, surprisingly, is the tonka bean. I do pick up some of the sandalwood. So on the base of it, for me, what I'm picking up is a little more of a woody vetiver, hint of iris kind of background. I don't really get a whole lot of sweet out of this. After about that 1 hour mark, the tea and the fig do fall off just a little bit. I can still pick it up. It still kind of floats around in the background with a little bit of that iris. This fragrance is very smooth for having a little bit of a bitter quality. This is not your stereotypical just wood, sweet, almost kind of leathery vibe, because you can get a little bit of like a cashmere or leather vibe out of this. But for the most part, everything you get out of this in the dry down, it does come across very earthy, but it's very clean as well. This is one of the few fragrances that may be one of the cleanest vetiver type of fragrances that I have in my whole collection, because this one has a property in it that where you could probably wear this in heat, but it would be a little bit of a difficult wear, especially in really, really high heat. You might be able to get away with it a little bit just because, like I said, this fragrance does come across very clean in the dry down. As it dries down, when it starts to smooth out, that's kind of when you pick that up, because when you first spray this on, this doesn't smell like this, more of like a fresh clean. Now it does have a lot of green to it. It does have a lot of lightness to it, but for the most part, you don't think like, this doesn't scream summer scent when you first put it on. Funny enough, the more the vetiver kind of gets a little dirty, the cleaner this thing gets. And in the dry down, it does get a little reminiscent of a few other fragrances, but it still stands alone enough to where this one is a little more unique than some of the other ones may be. One of the things that I was reading around whenever I picked this one up is this thing was a hype monster when it first came out. I can see where some of the hype was. I just can't see where a lot of the monstrous hype was. I don't think that this fragrance was anything that was like a pure standout fragrance. I don't think it was one that kind of set the bar necessarily, but it is a top tier fragrance nonetheless. If nothing else about the scent quality, the naturalness you get out of this, a lot of the scent profiles you get out of this are going to smell amazing. This one is a little more on the mass appealing side for being a more of a top end kind of mix between designer and niche. But if I had to give this fragrance a rating right now, honestly, I'd give it an 8.5 out of 10. The only few things I may dark it on just a little bit is I actually wish the tea note was just a little bit stronger, and I kind of wish it stayed through all the way into the dry down. For this being like a sandalwood and tonka base, I really don't get a whole lot of tonka. I get a little bit of the sandalwood, but the biggest thing I get out of this is a lot of that heavy hitting earthiness with touches of iris, and it does have a little bit of that fig, tea, cardamom, the top notes there. It does dry down to that a little bit in the background, but it's not very present at all, especially once you wear this for about that 2 to 3 hour mark. After several hours, this does become much, much more of just kind of a vetiver style fragrance. For a bourbon vetiver, I actually wish this had a little bit of a boozy nature to it. I feel like a real touch of booze somewhere in this would just set this thing top tier. But for everything else you get out of this, it's a rock solid fragrance. Like I said, you get an awesome presentation out of this. The atomizer is very good. The cap's good. As far as you get everything out of it, it's top tier. The bottle has some weight to it, so you can kind of see where the money was spent on this particular fragrance. Unfortunately though, I do think for the $160 price range, even from discounters, I do think this is a little bit steep for the fragrance you get. I wish that there was just a few things done just a little bit differently on this. But nonetheless, this fragrance has a mass appeal effect to it, and it does smell very good. I would not shy anyway. If you love vetiver fragrances, I would not shy away from this thing at all. The naturalness of this fragrance, like I said, is truly what sets this thing apart. This smells so good for a vetiver fragrance, especially if you love those deep, rich, dark ones. Because like I said, as it dries down, the vetiver gets very clean, and this just becomes a more easy wear. It's actually easier to wear in the dry down than it is in the opening. But I do think that is going to get us wrapped up. As always, thank you everyone for watching. Thank you everyone for subscribing, for sticking around, staying tuned, watching the videos. I truly appreciate it. And as always, thank you everyone for watching, and we will see you next time.